here to interview Sandra Elia. She's a counselor from Canada. She's had her own experience with food addiction, and she improved her relationship with food of people and improves the body acceptance of those that suffer from food addiction. Hi, Sandra.
Hi, thank you for having me. This is exciting to be in Australia, at least virtually.
Exactly.
Yes.
So, Sandra, thank you for joining me. It's an absolute pleasure. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey with food addiction.
For sure. So I am, as you mentioned, a food addiction counselor here in Canada and very much a pioneer in this field in Canada. I'm very proud to say that I have Canada's only outpatient program. That's an 8-week program that runs in clinics across Canada. And then I worked alongside Dr. Vera Tarman to create the only inpatient program that we have here in Canada at a treatment house. And so this treatment house, Renaissance, was formed in the 1970s and basically worked with people who had alcoholism or drug addiction. And then they opened their doors to food addicts about 5 years ago. So I helped create that program and I ran it for a year, which was one of the most rewarding years of my career. It was amazing to be in this beautiful, safe space. It was for women only. And those are some of the most beautiful souls you'll ever want to meet, people trying to recover from their addiction. And having said all that, I have, which I think even qualifies me more, is that I am a recovering food addict. And, you know, if I take you back to my 20s, which for so many people, it's the happiest time of their lives, it was very much the saddest, darkest struggle. I was well over 100 pounds overweight. And I wish that I could say it was just the food and the eating that was my problem, but it permeated everything. My marriage was breaking down. My career was stalling. I was on extended sick leave. I had debilitating depression. Like it all just came crashing down on me. And at that point in my late 20s, I had tried every diet out there. I was the diet queen. You name a scheme. I tried it not once, twice, 3 times and spent thousands of dollars because I just wanted that perfect diet. I see the diet industry a little bit like a carnival now, right? It's a lot of charlatans selling fake hope to the desperate. And that was me. I bought any fake hope I could get my hands on. And I remember the very last diet I went on, I was starting a new job in our financial district in Toronto for a consulting firm. And I hired a Bay Street dietitian and lost 50 pounds in 6 months. That's what she promised me. But I also managed to kick in the starvation mode in my brain, which is a real thing, as you know, right? Because humans have gone through famine. And after every famine comes the feast. And so my rebound not only included those 50 pounds, but an additional 50, which was such a humiliating experience in my life because I had to show up at work month after month, getting heavier and like literally before people's eyes. And the turning point for me was when I treated my eating and my weight as an addiction. That was the turning point where I said goodbye to diets. And I began to understand that I use food in a very similar way that somebody living with alcoholism uses alcohol. It's very similar.
And how do you shift it into becoming a food counselor?
Yeah. So I spent 15 years at an amazing consulting firm, and it was really just a blessing, that career and that time there and the people that I met there. But it never filled my soul. Never. I wasn't, it
wasn't your call.
It wasn't my calling, and I was unhappy and I was unfulfilled. And then I had my daughter, which was, the single greatest blessing in my life. And I needed to find a way to be a single mom and to be there for her and to have a career. And so I did go back to school and I became a professional coach. And then my beautiful niece told me, so you're going to help food addicts. And I was like, oh, maybe. I can't help food addicts. At first I was like, no way. I can't do it. I can't help them. And then, I just dipped my toe in the water and all the opportunities, sometimes you just have to put it out there and then the universe responds with, oh, yes, you are.
It opens up to you, doesn't it?
Yeah, it did. Totally.
And how many years have you been doing this?
So I think I'm on year 7.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's impressive. It's a beautiful history because you ended up understanding yourself, and through understanding yourself it's when you started helping others.
Yes. Yeah. And it wasn't, until a long period of healing. It wasn't like, oh, I healed myself in a year. And my healing still continues. It was at least over 10 years, 10, 15 years of my own healing before I even attempted to try to help anybody else. And then and become formally educated as well.
And so this is a question that most people would be having. How would someone know what are the trigger foods, and how would someone know if they're a food addict? Are there any criteria you tend to follow, or it's just make it practical? Are there any obvious things that you can see in people that make them a food addict?
Yeah, I think there are 3 main hallmarks of addiction. So the first one is withdrawal. So if you try to stop your trigger foods, so let me actually back up and define trigger foods. Trigger foods are foods that we obsess about. Once we start, it's very hard to have a reasonable portion, and they often lead to an overeating episode. What trigger foods often have in common is that they are highly processed. They are chemically engineered foods. I actually don't even call them foods. I call them food-like substances because they're made in factories, they're nutrient poor, they cause disease, and they come with a huge price tag. We pay the price tag of our emotional well-being, our physical well-being, our spiritual well-being. So just to be clear, that's what a trigger food. It's almost always refined sugar or refined flour products. Yeah, like the pizzas, the pastas,
And processed, right? So
processed. That's what the name of addiction.
And so I was having this chat. Interesting. I was having this chat with a family, and mom brought in 2 kids, one of which was genetically predisposed to be overweight, and you could just see how there was a resemblance towards dad, who was overweight. The other child was similar to mom, and he was slim. Yeah. And so we started having a chat about processed food and their addictive properties. And the first question I had is, do you know how to read food labels? And the first thing that came to mind was, why should we be reading food labels?
Exactly.
And so if you cannot recognize what's on a box or a bag, it's not food, it's chemical.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Broccoli does not come with a list of ingredients. Yeah. So once you identify your trigger foods, then we can look at the 3 hallmarks of addiction. So one of them is withdrawal. So when you try to stop having your trigger foods, do you experience withdrawal, physiological and physical withdrawal symptoms? And I can tell you, even if you're not a food addict, if you give up sugar for 10 days, you're going to have headaches. You're going to be irritable. You're you feel it. And you're not even addicted to sugar, speaking of someone. And then the second hallmark is increased tolerance. So that means there was a time when you could have a reasonable portion, and then that portion just keeps getting bigger and bigger, that you're getting a tolerance for this sugar or flour substance. And then the third one, which is like a no-brainer, that it's addiction, is that you have consequences from your eating and your weight that you desperately do not want, and yet you cannot stop. So we're talking about people who may have diabetes, fatty liver disease, hypertension, loss of mobility, and yet they can't stop. They're suffering. Yeah. And so that is also another hallmark of addiction, and that it is affecting every area of their life. So if I have a client and they're like, it affects my marriage, it affects my career, it affects my parenting, I'm like, okay. So again, these are little signals that addiction may be present.
So those negative consequences, people just cannot beat them, and they keep going into this cycle of consumption. Yeah. And there's a number of people that are going through those. And there's a big, difficult distinction. Well, it's difficult to make a distinction between binge eating and the spectrum of disorder eating. And so I'm going to quote Dr. Vera Tarman that you work with on this matter, because she's again a pioneer on the subject. She says that the food addict responds to physical cravings, and they're usually created by that need, that dopamine surge that you get from needing that substance. So food ignites your reward pathway in the limbic brain, which is different to what an emotional eater does, right? So an emotional eater eats to heal, to soothe an emotional cue. And I find that a helpful description. So if you're someone who feels this physical urge to consume, you should be talking to someone about the possibility of having food addiction.
And oftentimes, food addicts will start out as emotional eaters, right? And in essence, we're all emotional eaters, right? Like it's celebration or I had a bad day. But what happens is if we're emotionally eating on highly addictive substances, then we can easily flip over.
Yeah.
And then it's no longer about a soothing. It's like, I need to have it now.
Tell me about what I think you helped Vera with as well, that I Am Sweet Enough movement that happens in September. Is that a good way of stopping your trigger food?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a part of that. Vera does that on her own, and she has built an incredible community. So anybody listening, definitely go over to Facebook page, I'm Sweet Enough, Sugar Free for Life. And I think so. I mean, you have the community, you have the resources, you have everybody trying to do the same thing. And, you know, who you surround yourself with, you ultimately start to become.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great way to just get a taste of what that life would be like. And you can also start to understand, I always say, if you want to understand why you abuse food, stop abusing food. And then all the reasons bubble up, right? Because September 1st, it's like, yeah, of course, why wouldn't I sign up for this? This sounds great. And then your partner comes home and you have a fight and you're like, well, now I can't do it. Or, you know, work dumps on you and you're stressed out. Well, now I can't do it. And then you begin to understand the drivers that are causing you to use food for solace.
And so now that if someone knows and most people know what the triggers are realistically. So when they contact you, how do you usually put through a plan on stopping these? So tell us a bit about what sort of advice and tips you give them on how to stop these and how to plan ahead.
Yeah. So definitely take it one meal at a time. If what we know about long-term behavioral change is often linked to self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is the belief that it is possible. So if you start this journey with, I am never going to have sugar and I'm never going to do this, your self-efficacy is going to be very, very low. Who can commit to anything for the rest of their lives? People put on white dresses and tuxedos and they commit, and then 50% of the time it doesn't work out. So when you take it down to just your next meal and having a willingness as opposed to I must, everybody doesn't work well with must. I'm willing for dinner not to have my trigger foods. And I'm not even going to worry about breakfast tomorrow. And if I feel like I can just do it for dinner, my self-efficacy hopefully will be around a 7 or 8.
So it's
right? And
baby
then
steps.
Baby steps. Yeah. Never think if you want to really discourage yourself, think for the rest of your life, for the rest of my birthdays, for the rest of Christmas. No, is it Christmas today? That's what when someone says, well, you know, is it Christmas today? Then we'll deal with Christmas when Christmas comes, because you'll be in a different frame of mind. Your mindset will be different. You'll feel better, stronger. We don't know what you're going to want on Christmas.
Exactly. That's fantastic advice. Tell us about your treatment modality. So what happens when someone comes to see you? How do you know what program to match that person with? So do you help them with?
So through the years, I was very fortunate that I started my career in the clinic. So you know Dr. Sean Wharton, and he's a prominent obesity doctor here in Canada. And at the time, I was working in, his 5 clinics in Southern Ontario, and I would do my program in clinic in front of people. Can you imagine? Wow. And it was the best way to start my career because I could see what landed with people, what caused confusion, what resonated, what didn't resonate. So I always had this feedback, this instant feedback loop that I could cultivate and make my programs better able to serve my clients. So I have a whole menu of options. Because of COVID, we have the gift of of everything being virtual. So I have, for people who are in real distress, I have something called a 28-day intensive, which actually mimics inpatient treatment that I help build, but people can do it from their comfort of their home. Because when I was at Renascent, there were so many barriers. People couldn't leave their families, work, money for 28 days. So I built a program that you can do from the comfort of your home, 4 meetings a week, right? And for me, those meetings are important. You fill up your tank, and all you have to do is get to the next meeting and get your tank filled up. And another important piece is accountability partners. So I take the time to interview each person and get their sense of where they are in life. And then I match them with an accountability buddy that they check in with every single day.
Okay.
This is a huge, huge piece to success. I'm actually quite good at it. When I retire from this, I'm going to become a matchmaker because over 90% of people stay in touch after the 28 days over, which warms my heart. And then we do like the cooking lessons. We look at every single program I have looks at every area of your life, because I believe we cannot just treat the food addiction if somebody's struggling with a dysfunctional work environment, right? If you go to a toxic work environment every day, how are you not going to use food? Yeah, exactly. If you're in an abusive marriage, how are you not going to use food to cope? So we look at every single area of the life. So I have the 28-day, I have the academy that's launching on September 28th, where I've brought together some of the top food addiction professionals, including Dr. Tarman, under one umbrella. Wow. So that's more of an academy. That's a 3-month program. I took time off this summer, and I was thinking, how can I serve my clients who have been with me 4 or 5 years, 6 years, who keep buying my same programs, only listening to my voice? And I thought, we have these professionals scattered across North America, working in silo. Why don't I bring them all together? And then my clients can hear different modalities, fill in gaps that I may be leaving, or say it in a way that allows them to hear it differently. So that's a 3-month commitment. And then I also have one-on-one. Some people just want that individual specific treatment, and that's another way. So, my website has them all. There's really something for everybody.
And the person ends up choosing what they think they need. So
or they can book a consultation with me, and I take a little bit of their history and I advise them what will work best for them.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And with those plans, there is a meal planning and developing healthy habits as you work with them.
So there's developing healthy habits. I do have a meal plan that was created by a registered dietitian and food addiction counselor. Mm-hmm. However, it is my belief that one meal plan cannot work for everybody.
So true.
It's not possible.
Yeah.
It's like everybody has health concerns, activity levels, cultural preferences. Yeah, that they have to be honored. So for me to say this is the plan that means you're abstinent is more about me than my patient. Yeah. Because I'm not listening to their specific needs. The only thing that I really ask is that you eliminate trigger foods and then eat everything else. Yeah. Just eat real food, cook. That's exactly.
It. Which is the way it should be, right? So you should be eating whole foods, moving your body, and loving yourself. Yeah. And that's it. Exactly. That will come natural once you get off the trigger foods.
Yeah.
Are there any other options for addiction, food addiction specifically? And do you know if they're evidence-based?
Yeah. So one thing I'm going to say, we don't have enough evidence for food addiction. We are definitely working hard on that in Canada. There is some research to suggest that harm reduction works for food addicts. So that means instead of completely giving up your trigger foods, you try to minimize. If you, for example, binge eat, 4 days a week, if you can get it down to 2 and then 2, 1 and out. So that's the only research I've seen. I haven't seen much research on abstinence-based models, but I always caution my clients, if somebody says they've got the answer, just run the other way, because nobody has the answer. Sure. Nobody has cracked this nut. And everyone has to find their way and what works for them.
So you're saying that when someone ends up defining themselves as a food addict and they know the trigger, they won't be able to go back to the trigger. Let's say pasta is your trigger. That's gone.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's always easier to eliminate the drug than to try to negotiate how much.
Yeah.
Right? And the same thing plagues somebody with alcoholism. Right? They think, but now maybe I could just drink on Fridays, exactly. Or maybe I could just drink on my birthday. Maybe I can figure it out. But if you have enough evidence to show you that once you start on your trigger food, you go down the same road. Why are you expecting anything different? And my hope is, especially with the 28-day, after 28 days of not having that hamster wheel and that mind chatter being given to food, that you're like, you know what, I actually don't want to go back.
And if
this
they
is
feel
peaceful.
better, exactly, they feel inner peace.
Can
you help people that are taking anti-obesity medication? So all of those people that have diabetes and they might be food addicts, or they already have been put on injectables, which gives them some sort of chemical buffering, but you can actually see them when they've got food addiction. They start going for the trigger food and they need a higher dose of medication. So do you have those patients?
100%. So I believe that anybody living with food addiction needs a village of support and many tools. And so one of those tools can definitely be an anti-obesity drug, right? Just to help with the cravings and the perceived hunger. Gives them a step up, no different than an antidepressant, right? It gives you that step up to be able to do the other things. But it isn't the whole answer. So the village has to include exercise, a meal plan. It has to include enough sleep. It has to include, I believe, a spiritual practice, community support. The more interventions that you can have, cognitive behavioral therapy, the higher your chance for success.
And tell me about a spiritual practice. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So often people who have struggled with their weight or their eating for years or decades, like myself, it chips away at your self-esteem and your self-worth. So spirituality in my programs is not religion. It is about understanding your worth, understanding there's nothing wrong with you. It is very hard to change in a constructive manner when motivated by shame, guilt, or hate. And think about how many people start on a journey to change their relationship with food filled with shame, guilt, or hate, right? Nobody, I don't know anybody on a Monday morning who starts a diet saying, I love myself so much that I'm going to eat lettuce for the next week, right? It's never that way. And so spirituality is just understanding you were all born with the spark of the divine and it's still there. We can tap into it. We can find a powerful, calm place inside of us and start breathing and living from that place of goodness. I'm sure you hear it in your patients. I was good this week. I was bad this week. Guess what? You're always good. Your eating was never a moral issue. Your worthiness is not negotiable on what you've eaten.
There's this binary concept which is wrong, right? You should just be feeling whole and truly well within. So you promote mindfulness then?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I think addictive eating is mindless eating. And one of the antidotes is mindful eating.
Exactly. How do you work on remission and relapses? So the patients that end up seeing you get follow-ups with you, what type of support network they've got after they've left the programs?
So relapse is part of almost every addict's journey. And in my programs, I have 3 pillars of recovery. And the first pillar is we eliminate our drug foods. The second one is community support. And the third one is the spiritual practice. So when someone comes back and says, I've experienced a relapse, we look at the 3 pillars, which I call the 3-legged stool. So if you ignore one of the legs, you fall down. Which one of these legs have you not been given full attention to? And inevitably, right, it's 1 or 2. And the other thing with relapse that I teach is everyone wants to come to me as a confessional. Oh, I ate this and I ate that. I'm like, I actually don't care about that. That is a moment in time gone forever. Nothing I can do to bring it back, nothing you can. What I'm most interested in hearing is what is the internal environment like? What are you saying to yourself right now? Are you beating yourself up? Do you think like if I take the shame stick out and I beat myself up long enough, hard enough, I'll never do it again? Well, the opposite is true. Because addiction, one of the drivers of addiction is pain. We don't want to feel pain. And if you're inflicting the pain, then you're going to need to use. So it's really more of a mindset around relapse. I like to look at it as a signal to go deeper in your healing. It's a signal to learn more. It's a signal to experience or give yourself unconditional love, right? Unconditional, not just love, but the acceptance of where you are today.
The fullness. True, so true. Any tips on body acceptance and self-compassion? Because patients will be vigilant on weight, and I know you've got a view on ditching the scales.
Yeah.
So should patients be skipping the weigh-ins?
Yes, unless you can be neutral. So this is what neutrality looks like with the scale. You've, for the last 2 weeks, you ate really well, you moved your body regularly, you feel fantastic, you get on the scale and you're up a pound. Yeah. Because that's what bodies do. It's not an accurate measure of how hard you're working, and it's not an accurate measure of your success. So if you go up a pound, does that mean you fall into despair, hopelessness, you give in and you walk away and eat? Then the scale is not safe for you. If you are neutral, you're like, oh, I'm up a pound and the sky is blue. Good, I'm on with my day. Then fine, keep weighing yourself. I think that I like to say my weight is none of my business. My business is to eat whole foods, move my body, and then appreciate wherever my weight ends up, because I've only got this one life to live. And one day I'm going to be 80 years old on my rocking chair, and I don't want to look back on my life and say, how many decades did I hate myself? How many years was I trying to control my eating and not appreciating my beauty? And we've all been there, right? You look at pictures of yourself in your 20s and your 30s, you're like, I was gorgeous. I was pretty. I had no idea, because we tend to be in that self-critical, unappreciative state. Well, guess what? No more. No more. I don't have any more time to waste on that. I got to love and enjoy this body today. And in doing that, it actually gives me intrinsic motivation to make better decisions. Because the self-hatred drains me of motivation and energy every day.
That's a beautiful philosophy. And I think people, regardless of if they're addicts or not, should be living that way. It's a self-acceptance and aiming for health.
Yeah.
Really. Any last tips on food addiction patients and those people suffering? Because it usually stems from trauma, I think. All of those people suffering from food addiction.
Yeah, I think that food addiction, and which often leads to obesity, we have to understand that it is a chronic, complex disease. It is not a moral failing. No one chooses obesity. No one chooses food addiction. And it is a disease with many, many contributing factors. Many of them are actually outside of your control. That if, for myself, my mother, when she was pregnant with me, she was living with bipolar disorder and obesity. So by virtue of being born to her, I was already had a 70% chance of developing obesity. And I haven't even had my first meal yet. And I'm not alone. A lot of people are like that. And yet we point the finger of blame. We point the finger of blame at people who've experienced trauma. They are genetically set up, this toxic food environment, and yet we seem to say it's their fault. And so my tip is it's absolutely not your fault, and that we need to start understanding that people do come in different body sizes and shapes too. And BMI is not. Do you use BMI in Australia?
No, well, I haven't come across it.
Body mass index.
BMI,
interesting.
Yes.
So yes. Okay. And so in North America, only 36% of our population fits within a normal BMI. So that really takes me back thinking, okay, we got to redefine, because we know that waist circumference is actually the best measure. So if you carry your weight in your midsection, that can be problematic. But if you carry your weight in your hips, your thighs, your butt, you know what? We need to get over ourselves. It's just a different body, and it can be beautiful in its diversity. So I guess, my tips are there's nothing wrong with you. Drop the judgment, and from dropping the judgment, you can look for solutions. In that state, you can find answers. Not in that frantic self-hatred state, but in that I'm okay, I am worthy, it is possible. And in that state, you can find
Sandra,
things.
that was fantastic. So thank you. And thank you again for the interview. One last question. Would you be able to help Australians with food addiction? So,
of course.
And that would be for Zoom, and your recovery programs would be virtual, obviously.
Yes, it's all virtual. Australians are most welcome. I do have people across the world in my program. So, of course, my arms extend out to that beautiful continent. You're all welcome. I love it. The accents add a beautiful flavor to every group. So, of course.
Thank you. Now, Thank you, Sandra, and it's been a fantastic interview. If you're interested in knowing more about Sandra's food addiction recovery program, you will find information on our website and show notes. And thank you again for bringing that passion and care you bring into improving people's health. Your website is www.sandraelia.com.
You got it.
Thank you, Sandra. We'll talk soon.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Now